Today I want to talk a little bit about creating perfect vertical and horizontal lines in your real estate or architecture videos. Now, if you are a interiors architecture or real estate photographer like I am, you know that one of the first principles is to make sure that your vertical lines are straight as well as your horizontal lines. And what I mean by that is when you have two vertical lines like this, you want to make sure that the lines are not converging, either in or out. You want to make sure that they're perfectly up and down. Same with horizontal lines. You want to make sure that your horizontal lines aren't crooked like this. You want to make sure that they're perfectly horizontal. Now, I don't know the technical exact reasons why this became a rule over time, but I have to guess that over time, like if you go back and look at some of the oldest architecture photos, a lot of those photos didn't necessarily have perfect vertical and horizontal lines. I think over time, it kind of became a thing as architects wanted to have or even maybe the photographers themselves wanted to have their photos be more of a technical and artistic representation of what the architect had designed. Even to this day, there's still some architecture photographs where you're gonna see verticals that are a little bit off, and for some reason, they're acceptable. So I don't think that there's necessarily a hard and fast rule to what makes a great image, but I think most of us, at least 99% of us, can agree that photos tend to look better when the vertical lines and horizontal lines are accurate, okay? Now, this also tends to really be more something that's more of an architecture, interiors, or real estate photography rule. When you look at wedding photos or portrait photos, a lot of the times you're not gonna see vertical and horizontal lines, and it probably, if you're like me, it probably drives you crazy and might even make you look at those images as kind of like not very professional. But again, this is a rule that's somewhat restricted to our particular niche. Now, when it comes to real estate video, it's kind of that rule seems to kind of go away for the most part. Usually when you look at some of the most well-produced real estate videos, you're not seeing people correcting their vertical and horizontal lines or shooting them for that matter. When you watch HGTV, you're not really seeing vertical lines and horizontal lines being corrected. Even when you watch movies, like I've YouTubed like the top or the most beautiful movie shots in movie history. And it's very rare where you see where the cinematographer or the cameraman actually nailed their verticals and horizontals, because I just don't think it's something that we really pay attention to unless it's part of the composition. So I think it is something that's very limited to just our industry, but I would make an argument that it does tend to make things look better when your lines are correct. So even me, I didn't even start paying attention to this for real estate video until probably the last year or so, as I started dabbling with the idea of making more architectural real estate films, or just films in general. So what I found was that as I started making more corrections to my verticals and horizontals in post-production and actually while on location, when I started paying more attention to those, I personally felt the quality of my work was improving. Okay, now it's to the point now, and I'm sure a lot of you experienced this, when you first learned about correcting your verticals and horizontal lines, once you got that and you started seeing that, and then you started seeing people who weren't correcting their verticals, you kind of look at them like, just correct the things, they'll look a lot better. And it kind of becomes a rule. And for me personally, I'm not saying this is a rule, I'm just trying to make a case for it, that I think when it comes to real estate video, we really shouldn't treat it any different than the real estate photography or architecture photography, because you're still documenting what was built, and you still want to take a somewhat technical approach to it. So obviously while you're on location, you want to do your best to try to keep things vertical and horizontal, understanding that is kind of hard sometimes with the technology we have. And you also don't want to spend all day trying to make sure that your cameras are all set up perfectly. That said, you can correct them fairly easy in post. And I'm going to show you actually how I do that, both in Davinci Resolve, which is a program I use, but also in Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that I tell you about our course, The Art of Real Estate Cinematography. If you're like me and you've struggled with video, or you just wanted to figure out a way to get better with video, this course is definitely for you. That was what I was going through. I was at this point where I've been doing video for a really long time, but everything was just kind of becoming repetitive. There wasn't anything special about the videos I was making. They were walkthrough videos. And then I started seeing the work of Nick Schwartzendruber. And if you're not familiar with him, he's the owner of Drone Cowboys, and the films that they make are just amazing. They are incredibly cinematic. He uses actors and lifestyle, and there's a certain way that his films look, and I want to learn how he did that. Not so much to copy his style, but to more just understand the thought process behind it. Now, over time, I've started to slowly adapt to that type of style, but I've definitely given it my own twist, and I think that this course could really help you do the same. Now, this course has over 8 hours of content, and there's over 80 videos in this course, and most of them are relatively short, just easily digestible snippets that you can easily find. They're all laid out in a titled format. Super easy to find, and if you're on iOS, you can actually download them to your phone and watch them at your own pace. So if you want to better understand the how and the why behind how to make better real estate films, click on the link below in the description to get 10% off the course today.
I started my company Drone Cowboys about 8 years ago with no film experience whatsoever. Throughout the last 8 years, I've shot hundreds of luxury estates, ranches, farms, recreational properties. Each one of those properties I've learned something new. The education really never stops, but if you're taking a more thoughtful approach to your business and creative process, you'll be able to take your business and filmmaking to the next level. This course is designed to really help show you the why behind the decisions that we make both in business and the production of real estate filmmaking. My name is Nick Schwarzenberger. Welcome to the Art of Real Estate Cinematography.
Now, just for clarification, I usually go through with a fine-tooth comb on any architectural film that I do, or if it's a higher-end luxury listing or just a higher-end, nicer home in general. For the most part, when I'm doing just a traditional listing, if it's just a regular real estate shoot, I'm gonna go through and correct things, but I'm not gonna spend as much time. I'm just gonna do a quick correction and be done with it. So I'm gonna be a little bit more meticulous in this process just to demonstrate what's possible. Now first, we're gonna start in Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro is not the program that I use personally to edit. I did use Premiere Pro until about a year ago when I switched to Davinci Resolve, but I used Premiere Pro for pretty much since about 2002, 2003. So I'm very familiar with the program. And then we'll go to Final Cut Pro, and then I'll end up in Davinci Resolve. You can see the time markers down below if you just want to skip to your editor. That said, let's go ahead and get started. So we're working with 4 different clips. 2 of the clips are to demonstrate verticals, and the other 2 clips are to demonstrate horizontals, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Now, let's just say you already have your footage assembled, and you just wanna go ahead and start doing corrective or perspective correction right now. There's 2 main filters that you're gonna use in Adobe Premiere, and that's corner pin and lens distortion. Now the first effect we're gonna start with is corner pin. And what you do is you just drag the effect onto your clip or double click it, however you do it. And it's relatively easy. You simply you go upper left, upper right, lower left or lower right. And this is just telling Premiere that you want, and this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis, by the way. The left column is x, this is the right column is y. But essentially what you're doing is you're telling Premiere, do you want to drag this to the left or to the right? And you can kind of see. So it starts out at 0. And we basically just say, let's just say this top left corner is fine, but we can tell that the bottom left corner is a little off. So we're going to drag the lower left to the left a little bit. As you can see, that starts to straighten out. So we know the left side is straight as of right now. And if we look over to the right side, we can tell the bottom right is a little off. So we're gonna move that to the right. And there you go. We already have our first perspectives corrected. And as you can see, it was relatively quick. You can do this very quickly. And for the most part, it should stay true throughout the rest of the clip, but you can always just double check. We're gonna go ahead and let this play. Yeah. And it basically stayed true until the end. Now, if it didn't, let's just say, you can also create keyframes to allow yourself to do a correction at the end. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. We're gonna create a keyframe on the upper, we're just gonna create a keyframe on all of them really. And we know that this is where we want actually, let's go back to the beginning. We'll create up keyframes at the beginning as well, because we already have everything set. So let's just start here. And we'll correct where we're at now. So we're gonna correct the upper left, let's see, or lower left that is. And we're gonna correct our upper left. It's more or less straight. Okay, so that's good there. And then we're gonna go ahead and let it play. Okay, and on this very last frame here, we're gonna correct perspectives one last time. Lower left, we want it to be out a little bit. Lower right looks pretty good, but I think maybe it could come over just a little bit. So we've essentially keyframed this, so it's gonna slightly adjust as the clip plays. So as you can see, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off temporarily. We went from this, where the angles are slightly crooked, to this, where the angles are corrected. All right, we'll go on to the next clip. And this, you can see this is way off. So what I like to do, and this is true for photography as well, if you kind of find your center lines, you wanna make sure that those are straight first before you start doing any kind of correction. So what we'll do first is we're gonna start on the rotation. And we're just gonna rotate this until the center lines seem pretty straight. And I think we got a good one there. So I'm gonna do minus 1.5. That looks pretty straight to me. And actually the vertical lines look relatively straight, but let's go ahead and zoom in first. That way we get rid of our black lines. Okay, so they are slightly crooked, and there's also a little bit of barrel distortion. So we're gonna drop this lens distortion on here. And we're just gonna mess with the curvature a little bit. And you just need to do this just a hair, like -1, -2, -3, or plus or minus usually does the trick. And it looks like +3 kind of took that barrel distortion out for us. So just before and after, you can kind of see how it's straighter now. And now we can go ahead and correct our perspective. So let's start at the first frame. Looks like it's pretty consistent throughout. So we can actually probably just get away with this. It looks relatively straight once we corrected the rotation. So we'll move on to the next one. This is a 1-point perspective, so I'm gonna go ahead, it's mostly the horizontal lines that I'm concerned with. I just wanna make sure that those are all straight. As you can see, they're converging to the bottom, to the right. So we're gonna go ahead and adjust those. We'll go ahead and drop on our corner pin. And what we need to do, okay, again, this is the X on the left and the Y axis is on the right. So we need to bring the right side up a little bit. So we're just going to bring this up. Oh, wrong way. That looks good. Actually, let's go to the first frame, just so we're... And then we're gonna do the lower right. We're gonna bring that down a little bit. Oh. And as you can see by doing that, it made this cabinet kind of come out a little bit. So now we need to correct the lower right. Bring that out a little bit. Straighten that up, and then the lower left will straighten that up as well. So now we have a perfectly squared up frame. Let's just go ahead and play this through to the end and see what ends up happening at the last frame. We could probably add some stabilization and stuff, but you get the point. For the most part, it's pretty straight, but it definitely needs some stabilization. Final one is right here, and this converges the other way, so we're just gonna correct these. So we're gonna go ahead and add our corner pin. We're gonna bring our upper left. Oops, that's the x-axis. Let's start with we'll bring our corner pin up. And actually, this is a good case for when we need to. So we're gonna go ahead and drop our corner pin. And in this case, you know, the center lines are actually a little off. So first we're gonna adjust the rotation, just like we did in the last clip. And it looks like just by rotating it to 1, that did the trick for the most part. I'm really looking at this line here, and it's actually probably more of a 0.5. It's just a very small amount, but nonetheless, we want to make sure we take care of that. We'll zoom in just by 2. Now we're just going to go ahead and figure out our lines here. So for the most part, it's pretty straight for the most part, but there's a little bit of correction we can do on the fireplace here. As you can see, I was kind of pointing more this way, very slightly, maybe like this way and not dead on. So we're gonna go ahead and fix that. So we're gonna start with the upper left. We're gonna pull that up a little bit. It goes like that. And we'll pull down the lower right a little, or lower left a little bit. And for the most part, I think that fixed it, but we also need to bring in the lower left to the left a little bit. And the lower right, we'll bring that over. Okay, so I think we got it. But for the most part, you can kind of see what it was just a very subtle correction, but it did correct everything. Oftentimes we're dealing with more extremes. But like I said, I tend to go through every clip and make sure they're perfectly straight because I just want to make sure that I'm representing whatever architectural structure that I did. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Final Cut Pro. I think we're done in Premiere. In Final Cut Pro now, unfortunately, I shoot RAW now with my Blackmagic, and I don't think I can, I don't use Final Cut Pro very often, it's been a while. But I don't think you can edit Blackmagic RAW clips in Final Cut Pro just yet. So we're just I'm just using some iPhone footage that I took about 1.5 years ago, and we're just gonna go ahead and edit that. So same principles still apply though. So fortunately with Final Cut, it's basically right in the main panel. You can just correct everything right from here. So if you look at this distortion, again, you have your X-axis and Y-axis. It's pretty much the same exact thing we just did in Premiere Pro, except it's just you have to go up and down versus left and right. So you start with your bottom left, or actually first thing you do is you need to first correct your rotation. So let's just make sure we have everything straight in the center beforehand. Then we're gonna go ahead and I'll reset this. Then you're just gonna figure out where you need to correct things. So we need to correct on the left. And we also need to correct on the right. Pull that out a little bit. And we pretty much have a straight clip now, so let's just take a look and see what it looks like. And you can also keyframe in this as well. I'm not gonna go through keyframing right now in Final Cut, but essentially if you skipped ahead to this, all you really need to do is wherever you find your first frame, and you just put you put your keyframe indicators right there, and you correct, actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and just do it now just so you guys can see it. But we're gonna first correct let's go to the end clip and we'll add a keyframe indicator or marker there as well. But we're gonna start at the first one. And we're gonna correct these first. So we're gonna do bottom left, we can bring back in. Bottom right, we can bring back in as well. You just gotta kind of keep on going back and forth until you have good balance with these. Whoops. And we're gonna go to our end frame, which is right, whoop. Right there. And we'll correct these, bottom left, bottom right. Okay, so now we should have a pretty straight, I'm gonna turn scrubbing off. It's driving me kind of crazy. Okay, so we got a straight clip. So we went from this, pretty crooked, to this, not crooked at all. So relatively easy, a little time consuming, but relatively easy. We'll go ahead and correct this one. This one's a little easier, I think. So first we'll start with the rotation, bring it down to, all right there, that looks pretty good. This one had a good example of barrel distortion, so I wanted to show you how you can do that in Final Cut as well. But first we'll go ahead and correct these. Let's zoom in a little bit. Where do you zoom? There we go. And then we're gonna go and correct the bottom left, pull that out. Bottom right, pull that out. And now we have a pretty straight clip. But again, we do have a little bit of barrel distortion in there. So what I do there is open up the effects panel. And we're gonna go to distortion, and you're gonna find a fisheye effect. Now, you guys, there may be an easier way to do this. This is the only way I know how to do it. So, but anyway, you drag that onto the thing, and it looks horrible, obviously. So we're just gonna go ahead and mess with this. And again, we'll probably just reset it to 0. And we're gonna bring the radius all the way up. At least that's what I do. I could be wrong. But literally it's just a very small amount, really. I mean, probably something like that. It's just a very subtle amount, 0.12. Very, very small amount, probably not even entirely necessary. But if you want to get a little anal with it, you certainly can. You can kind of see it's not a huge difference. It's a very subtle difference, but there was a little bit of distortion. You can correct it right there. Again, there may be an easier way to do this in Final Cut. I don't use Final Cut regularly. I just knew how to do this because of the course that we made. All right, so we'll move on to this horizontal. So we'll start with the rotation. We'll get this center line perfectly straight right there, and I think we got it. So we'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, got the rotation, and now we're not gonna mess with the barrel distortion even though it's there, but because you got the point on how I did that on the last clip. So for now, we're just gonna go ahead and correct the perspectives on this. So if we're gonna start with you can kind of just look around and see where things need work. So bottom left obviously needs some work. We're gonna bring that out a little bit. Bottom right needs some work. We'll bring the bottom right out a little bit. But then we have the top left definitely needs to come up. So we need to go to the y-axis and bring that up. That looks pretty decent, but now we have these lines converging, so we're going to go to the bottom left. Actually, we were on the bottom left, so we're going to bring that down. Bring the top left up, bottom left down. And that should fix it. So it looks pretty decent now. Again, a little bit of stabilization, a little bit of barrel distortion correction. That clip would look pretty decent. But we went from this to this. Much better looking in my opinion. Here's another horizontal frame. Really bad looking. We're gonna go ahead and start with adjusting the rotation a little bit. We'll zoom it in. And we're gonna start with the bottom left, bring that out. Bottom right looks pretty decent for now, but it's converging up here, so we're gonna bring the bottom right down. And then we'll bring the bottom left, or bottom right out on the axis, or vertical rather. And then we'll bring the bottom right out, vertical. And for the most part, I think it looks pretty straight now. Again, you'd probably want to keyframe this one, and it definitely needs some stabilization. But we have a much more straighter clip. As you can see, here is the before rather, and here's the after. All right, so now we're in Davinci Resolve, and in my opinion, as I said before, I believe this is the easiest program to correct your lines in. And the reason being is that you can simply just adjust the pitch and yaw. Simple as that, just like in Lightroom. So you just really first adjust your rotation, and adjust your pitch and yaw to where they're pretty much vertical, zoom in a little bit. And I accidentally filmed this with black cinema bars, so we're just gonna ignore this part for now. Actually, no, I'll go ahead and zoom in. There we go. And as you can see, they're already corrected. And what I also like to do, now this is only available in the paid version of Davinci Resolve, but if you hit this lens correction, it'll actually analyze the distortion in your lens and it'll correct it for you. So this is what it looked like before, after. Very subtle difference, but it prevents me from having to do any kind of additional effects. And you can manually adjust this as well. We're gonna move on to the next clip. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in again so we can get rid of those black bars. And we're gonna adjust the rotation angle first, and we're gonna adjust the distortion just to analyze. And it probably needs to come up just a little bit more. Sometimes it nails it, sometimes it doesn't. We're gonna go ahead and adjust the pitch. And we're pretty much done. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Looks pretty solid. Now again, I shot these with cinema bars, so I didn't zoom in all the way. I probably could here. And still looks a little off, so just go ahead and rotate it a little bit. Bring this distortion up a little bit. Perfect. Go on to the next one. And we're just going to adjust the horizontals here. That's the yaw. We'll adjust the pitch. Just like in Lightroom, super easy. We're going to go ahead and zoom in. Just for fun, we'll go ahead and analyze this, see if there's any, doesn't look like there's much barrel distortion, so it's not going to correct that for us. But for the most part, you can kind of see it's just like that, pretty easy. Okay, and then the final clip. This one doesn't have any cinema bars, so this will be a little easier. I'm going to adjust the rotation, zoom in a little bit. Actually, I think I went a little overboard on the rotation, so bring that back. I don't think I need to do that at all, actually. I'm just going to adjust the yaw to where it looks right. I think it looks pretty good. Pitches, or yeah, there we go. It looks better. All right. Now, obviously, this needs some stabilization. We're not going to do that now, but went from this to this. And obviously, you can go in and refine it a little bit more. So there you have it. Easy to correct your perspectives in post-production. Again, this is not a requirement. It's not absolutely necessary. Some of the top people in the industry do not do it. You can look through some of the most famous movie scenes. They're not done. The lines are all crooked. This is not a requirement. But Again, it's just like when you learn how to correct verticals in photography. Once you do it and you start noticing others not do it, you kind of start to see the importance of it, especially when it relates to real estate and architecture videography. Again, check out The Art of Real Estate Cinematography, 10% link off below in the description. Thanks so much for watching.